The sky over New Terra burned red. Explosions tore through the colony's defense systems as alien warships hovered above like monstrous predators. The people of New Terra had once believed they were safe, that the Selvok Empire would never reach this far. They were wrong. Admiral Ethan Grayson stood in the command center, his hands gripping the metal railing as he watched the destruction on the holographic display. Red dots, enemy ships, filled the sky, while the blue dots, the colony's defenses, were disappearing one by one. Admiral, we've lost the Eastern Shield generators. The Selvok are landing ground forces, a young officer shouted. His voice was shaky, his hands trembling as he scanned the battlefield reports. Grayson clenched his jaw. He had seen war before. He had fought on Mars, on Titan, and in the asteroid wars. But this was a massacre. They're killing civilians. Another officer whispered. Sir, what do we do? Grayson took a deep breath. There was only one answer. We fight. The invasion begins. On the streets of New Terra, chaos erupted. The Selvok, towering reptilian creatures with razor-sharp claws and glowing red eyes, stormed through the city. Their plasma rifles burned through walls, vehicles, and people alike. A mother clutched her child, hiding behind a collapsed building. She tried to keep her son quiet, pressing a hand over his mouth as heavy alien footsteps approached. The Selvok warriors scanned the ruins, their cold, unfeeling eyes searching for survivors. A scream echoed through the air, a man being dragged from the rubble. The Selvok did not believe in mercy. They executed him on the spot. Farther away, human soldiers took cover behind a barricade of destroyed vehicles. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes wiped the sweat from her face, her pulse racing. Her squad had only a few men left, their ammunition running low. Commander, we can't hold them. One of her men yelled, reloading his rifle. We don't have to hold, she replied. We just have to buy time. Time for what? She didn't know. Reinforcements weren't coming. Earth was too far, and the rest of the fleet was either destroyed or retreating. New Terra was alone. The final stand. In orbit, human battleships fought desperately against the massive Selvok fleet. The HSS Valkyrie, one of the last surviving dreadnoughts, fired its cannons, lighting up the dark void with explosions. Captain Daniel Rice barked orders as his crew struggled to keep the ship in one piece. We're surrounded, his first officer shouted. Rice gritted his teeth. Then we take as many of them with us as we can. The Valkyrie turned sharply, its engines burning hot, and rammed straight into an enemy warship. The collision sent shockwaves through space, ripping apart both vessels in a fireball of destruction. Back on the ground, Admiral Grayson watched the Valkyrie's last stand. His chest tightened. They were losing. Sir, we have one last evacuation ship left, an officer said. It's damaged, but it might make it. Grayson turned to the officer. How many people can it carry? 100, maybe less. There were still thousands of civilians left in the city. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He could only save a handful. Load the children first, he ordered. Get them off this planet. The officer hesitated. And the rest of us? Grayson didn't answer. They both knew the truth. One survivor escapes. The evacuation ship lifted off, its engine sputtering as it pushed through the atmosphere. Inside, a young pilot named Jack Carter gripped the controls, sweat dripping down his face. Come on, he muttered, dodging enemy fire. Behind him, a dozen scared children huddled together, crying. They had lost everything. Their families, their homes, their future. Jack's ship shook violently as Selvok fighters chased him. One more hit, and they were done for. But then, a massive explosion rocked the sky. One of the remaining human cruisers self-destructed, taking out half the enemy fleet. It was a final sacrifice, and it gave Jack just enough time to escape into hyperspace. As the stars stretched before him, Jack clenched his fists. He was the last one, the last survivor of New Terra. The Selvok thought they had won. They thought humanity was broken. They were wrong. Look for part 2. They wanted us gone. They thought we would never fight back. But in the silence of space, something was coming. And when humanity strikes back, the galaxy will tremble. The cold emptiness of space stretched before Jack Carter as the damaged evacuation ship drifted through the void. He could still hear the distant echoes of New Terra's destruction in his mind. The screams, the explosions, the final moments of a world that no longer existed. The children in the back of the ship were silent, their eyes hollow with shock. They had no families left, no homes to return to. Jack gritted his teeth. He had to keep going. He had to survive. For them. For the fallen, for the future of humanity. Far behind him, the Selvok fleet moved like a swarm of locusts, feasting on the ruins of New Terra. The war was over, at least in their eyes. Humanity had been pushed back, their colonies burned, their fleets shattered. The Empire believed they had won. But they had made a mistake. They had left a survivor. And Jack knew one thing for certain. Humans did not forget. The ship's warning lights flickered, pulling him back to reality. The hyperdrive was damaged, barely functional. If he didn't find a safe harbor soon, they'd be dead in the void. He checked the navigation system. There was one possible destination, an old mining station on the edge of human space. It had been abandoned years ago, but if it still had supplies, it might be enough to keep them alive. With a deep breath, he adjusted the controls and set course. Hours later, the ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. The mining station loomed ahead, a dark and lifeless structure floating in the emptiness. Jack carefully piloted the ship into the docking bay, metal grinding against metal as the damaged vessel settled into place. He stood up and turned to the children. "Stay here. Lock the doors. I'll be back." They nodded without a word. Fear clung to them like a shadow, but Jack had no time to comfort them. He grabbed his rifle and stepped out into the station. The air was stale, the lights flickering weakly as he moved through the silent corridors. It felt like a graveyard. Old supply crates were scattered across the floor, some broken open, others still intact. Jack moved quickly, gathering whatever he could: rations, medical kits, anything useful. But as he reached for another crate, he heard something, a sound that did not belong, a low mechanical hum. His grip tightened on his rifle as he turned a corner, and froze. A towering machine stood before him, its glowing red eyes locked onto his own. It was not human. It was not Selvok. It was something else. Something old. Something deadly. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He had come here to find safety. Instead, he had found something far worse. And in that moment, he realized New Terra was only the beginning. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. Jack's heart pounded as he stared at the towering machine. It stood motionless, its red eyes glowing in the dim light of the abandoned station. He tightened his grip on his rifle, finger hovering over the trigger. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The air was thick with silence, and then, without warning, the machine moved. A deep mechanical hum filled the corridor as its limbs shifted, metal grinding against metal. Jack braced himself, ready to fire. Then the machine spoke. Its voice was not like the cold, artificial tones of a standard AI. It was layered, deep, and ancient, carrying the weight of something far older than humanity. Human detected. Status. Confirming threat level. The red eyes pulsed. Jack knew he had only seconds before it decided if he was friend or foe. "I'm not your enemy," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I just need supplies. My people. We're all that's left." The machine's head tilted slightly, as if analyzing him. New Terra. Destroyed. Selvok fleet victorious. Humanity. Compromised. Jack clenched his jaw. "We're not finished. Not yet." The machine was silent for a long moment. Then, something unexpected happened. The red glow in its eyes faded to a neutral white. "You are incorrect," it said. "Humanity's war is not over. It has only reached its most dangerous phase. You require assistance." Jack blinked. Assistance. The machine took a step forward, and for the first time, Jack realized just how massive it was. Easily 3 times his size. Its frame built for war. But it wasn't attacking. Instead, a panel in its chest slid open, revealing a storage compartment filled with old but intact weapons, energy cells, and survival gear. Designation: ECKO-47, it said. Last operational defense unit of Outpost Theta. Purpose: to serve the protectors of humanity. Jack hesitated, trying to process what was happening. This machine, was built by humans, a remnant of a forgotten past. And now, it was offering him the tools to fight back. But before he could speak, the station shuddered violently. An alarm blared through the corridors. Jack's stomach twisted. He knew that sound. A proximity alert. Someone, or something, had found them. He turned to ECHO-47. "Do you have a ship?" The machine nodded. "Secondary transport vessel. Functional. Minimal armament. Capable of escape." Jack didn't hesitate. "Then let's move." As they rushed back toward the docking bay, Jack's mind raced. Whoever was out there, it wasn't human. The HFY never left survivors. If they had tracked him here, it meant one thing. They weren't just hunting for the last survivors of humanity. They were making sure the war would never rise again. The station's metal corridors trembled as the alarm blared. Jack sprinted toward the docking bay, his pulse hammering in his ears. The children were still on his ship, helpless, trapped. He couldn't let them die here. He wouldn't. Behind him, ECHO-47 moved with heavy mechanical steps, its servos whirring as it kept pace. "Proximity alert confirmed," the machine said. "Multiple inbound signatures. Conclusion: hostile boarding party." Jack gritted his teeth. Xelvok. ECHO-47's glowing eyes flickered. Affirmative. 3 dropships detected. Estimated troop count: 30. Jack cursed under his breath. 30 enemies. He had barely enough ammo for a handful. His ship wasn't built for combat. It was a broken-down evacuation vessel. Even with ECHO-47's help, the odds were grim. But they weren't impossible. He skidded to a halt near a supply locker, yanking it open. Inside were old but functional explosives, emergency rations, and spare power cells. He grabbed what he could, shoving extra magazines into his belt. "Can you fight?" he asked the machine. ECHO-47's metal fingers flexed. Designed for planetary defense. Weapon systems. Online. Combat protocols. Engaged. Jack nodded. "Then let's make sure those bastards regret coming here." A deep metallic thud echoed through the station as the HFY boarding clamps attached to the outer hull. The aliens were forcing their way in. Jack rushed toward the ship, slamming his fist against the access panel. The door hissed open, revealing the terrified faces of the children. "We've got company," Jack said quickly. "Stay in here. Don't open this door unless I say so." A small girl, couldn't have been older than 10, clutched his sleeve. "Are they coming for us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack knelt down, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Not if I have anything to say about it." He turned, sealing the ship's door behind him. Then he and ECHO-47 took position near the entrance to the docking bay. The metal groaned under pressure as the HFY forced their way in. Then the first explosion hit. Jack had placed the explosives along the outer corridors, setting them to detonate as soon as the enemy breached. A deafening roar filled the station as the walls shook, sending debris and fire cascading through the air. The HFY screamed. Some were vaporized instantly, others thrown into the walls by the sheer force. But not all of them. Through the smoke, dark figures emerged, tall, armored, deadly. Their glowing blue eyes locked onto Jack's position. They raised their weapons. ECHO-47 moved first. The machine unleashed a storm of plasma fire, each shot precise and devastating. The Xelvok returned fire, their energy rounds slamming into the walls, scorching metal. Jack ducked behind cover, popping up just long enough to fire his rifle. He took one down with a headshot, then another. But more were coming. "We can't hold this position," Jack shouted. "We need to get to the ship." ECHO-47 analyzed the battlefield in a fraction of a second. Tactical suggestion: suppressive fire. Evacuation priority. "Do it," Jack ordered. ECHO-47 unleashed a relentless barrage, forcing the Xelvok to take cover. Jack seized the moment, sprinting toward the ship. He hit the ramp and spun around, laying down covering fire as ECHO-47 followed. The machine took several direct hits, but its armor held. The moment they were inside, Jack slammed the door shut. "Get us out of here," he barked. ECHO-47 didn't hesitate. The ship roared to life, engines firing at maximum power. The docking bay exploded behind them as they launched into space, leaving the burning station in their wake. Jack fell into the pilot's seat, gasping for breath. They had survived. But as he looked at the ship's radar, his relief vanished. A massive Xelvok warship had just entered the system, and it was coming straight for them. Jack's hands flew over the ship's controls, heart pounding as warning alarms blared. The Xelvok warship loomed on the radar, a monstrous vessel, easily 100 times the size of his ship. There was no outrunning it, no hiding. The children huddled together in the corner of the cabin, their frightened eyes locked onto him. He couldn't let them die. He had to think. Fast. ECHO-47's voice cut through the chaos. Enemy warship blocking weapons. Estimated time to impact: 30 seconds. Jack clenched his jaw. Options. The machine processed for a moment. Escape impossible. Counterattack inadvisable. Jack swore under his breath. He wasn't just going to sit here and wait to die. He glanced at the weapons panel. Barely anything. A single forward cannon meant for mining operations, not combat. Against a Xelvok warship, it was as useful as throwing rocks at a hurricane. But then something caught his eye, a flickering signal on the screen. A faint power signature deep within the debris field near the station. A ship. A weapons cache. Whatever it was his only shot. Jack grabbed the controls. "We're going there." ECHO-47 hesitated. "Risk level? Extreme." "Yeah, so is getting blown out of the sky." Without waiting, Jack jerked the ship into a sharp turn, diving toward the debris. The Xelvok warship adjusted its aim, and a moment later, the void lit up with streaks of burning plasma. The ship shook violently as energy blasts grazed the hull. The shields were barely holding. One direct hit, and they were gone. Jack pushed the engines to their limit, weaving through the wreckage of destroyed human ships. Twisted metal and shattered hulls drifted like tombstones in space, a graveyard of those who had fought and lost. But then, in the heart of the debris field, he saw it. A massive, half-buried warship, ancient, human. Its surface was scarred from battle, but its structure remained intact. And on its side, faded but still visible, were the words, "UHS Vengeance." Jack's breath caught in his throat. He knew that name. Every surviving human did. The Vengeance had been lost in the early days of the war, a prototype battleship that never saw combat. If it still had power. ECHO-47's voice broke through. Analysis complete. UHS Vengeance. Operational status: unknown. Power signature detected. Potential for reactivation. Jack didn't hesitate. How do we wake it up? The ship rocked violently as another blast barely missed them. The Xelvok weren't waiting. They were closing in for the kill. ECHO-47's eyes flickered. Docking procedure. Manual override required. Jack's hands were already moving. Then let's make history. He aimed straight for the Vengeance's hangar bay, dodging burning wreckage and incoming fire. The ship screamed in protest as it crashed inside, skidding across the metal floor. Sparks rained down. Systems flickered, but they were in. Jack unstrapped himself and turned to the children. "Stay here." Then he locked eyes with ECHO-47. "Let's wake up a legend." As they ran deeper into the ancient warship, the Selvok warship loomed closer outside. They had minutes, maybe less. But Jack didn't care. Because if the Vengeance still had fight left in her, then this war wasn't over. It was just getting started. Jack sprinted through the dark corridors of the UHS Vengeance, his boots echoing against the metal floor. The emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows as dust floated in the stale air. This ship had been dead for decades, but deep within its core, something still pulsed. ECHO-47 moved beside him, scanning the ship's systems. Main reactor, dormant. Secondary power grid, functional but unstable. Weapons, offline. Jack exhaled sharply. How long to bring it online? The machine calculated. Unknown. Primary controls require manual override. Jack clenched his fists. Time was against them. Outside, the Selvok warship hovered over the debris field like a predator circling its wounded prey. They wouldn't wait forever. Soon, they'd blast the Vengeance to pieces, along with everyone inside. They reached the command bridge. It was a tomb. The control panels were covered in dust. The chairs were empty, their former occupants long turned to bones. But Jack didn't have time to mourn. He slid into the captain's seat and powered up the interface. The screen flickered. Then, a voice. Cold. Mechanical. UHS Vengeance. Awaiting command input. Jack's pulse quickened. It was still listening. He leaned forward. Activate emergency restart. Bring all systems online. Silence. Then the ship groaned. A deep, thunderous sound as power surged through its veins. The emergency lights brightened. The air vents roared to life. On the main display, weapons systems flickered. Shields struggled to activate. The Vengeance was waking up. But it wasn't fast enough. A proximity alert blared. On the screen, the Selvok warship was closing in. It was charging weapons, preparing to finish them. Jack turned to ECHO-47. We need those weapons online now. The AI didn't respond. Instead, it rushed to a nearby terminal, plugging into the ship's ancient systems. Sparks flew as circuits overloaded. The entire ship trembled. Then, all at once, the interface changed. Weapons, online. Shields, partial power. Combat mode, active. Jack's heart pounded. He grinned. Let's see what you've got. He grabbed the targeting controls. The Vengeance's guns, dormant for decades, swung into position. The Selvok had no idea what was coming. They fired first. A plasma blast surged toward the Vengeance. The ship shook violently, but it held. The shields barely absorbed the impact. Jack didn't hesitate. He slammed the fire controls. A deafening roar echoed through space as the Vengeance returned fire. Massive cannons unleashed a storm of energy. The Selvok ship twisted to evade, but the Vengeance's firepower was relentless. One shot slammed into their shields. Another tore through their hull. The Selvok had thought they were preying on the last scraps of humanity. They were wrong. The Vengeance had returned, and the battle was far from over. The Selvok warship reeled from the unexpected assault, its shields flickering as fire and debris erupted along its hull. Inside the UHS Vengeance, Jack gritted his teeth, his fingers tightening around the controls. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was payback. The comms crackled to life with a guttural voice. Human vessel. Stand down. You cannot win. Jack smirked. That's funny. Looks like we're winning just fine. The enemy ship charged its main cannon. A blinding pulse of red energy gathered at its core, aimed directly at them. One shot from that, and the vengeance was gone. Jack's mind raced. Their shields weren't strong enough to take that hit. They had power, but they needed something more, something the enemy wouldn't expect. ECHO-47's voice broke through the tension. Recommendation: tactical overload of main thrusters. Direct collision. Jack's heart pounded. You're telling me to ram them? The AI hesitated. Probability of survival: minimal. Jack exhaled. Sounds about right. He slammed the controls forward. The Vengeance roared to life, engines burning at maximum as the massive warship surged toward the enemy. The Selvok hesitated, just for a second. That was all Jack needed. At the last moment, he pulled back, twisting the ship into a sharp barrel roll. The Selvok, expecting a suicide charge, overcompensated, leaving their side exposed. Jack seized the opening. Fire everything. The Vengeance unleashed hell. Cannons blazed, missiles roared, and the ancient ship poured its wrath into the Selvok warship. Their shields collapsed. Their hull fractured. Fires raged across their structure. And then, an explosion. The enemy ship detonated from the inside out, breaking apart into 1,000 burning fragments. Shockwaves rocked the Vengeance, but Jack held steady, breathing hard. Silence. Then, ECHO-47 spoke. Enemy vessel. Neutralized. Jack slumped back in his seat. They had done it. He turned toward the children, still huddled in the corner of the bridge, eyes wide with disbelief. He gave them a tired smile. Told you we'd make it. But as he looked out into the stars, his victory felt hollow. The Selvok weren't done. This was only one ship. There were more out there. Many more. And they had just woken up something dangerous. The Vengeance was back. And humanity's war had just begun.